I am really thrilled to be here. We've talked the intersection of atomic energy and carbon dioxide removal a couple years ago, right? This is a topic that we'd like to keep uh, really up to speed on because energy and carbon dioxide removal are so intertwined. Energy and carbon dioxide are intertwined. Energy and carbon dioxide removal are intertwined. And I'm thrilled to be here with Kirsty, Eric Ingersoll, and Eric Meyer, Kirsty Gogan, um, our three experts for today. Welcome, y'all.
Mhm. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
So to kick things off, let's get started. We can have everybody just give a one sentence intro about who you are, and then we'll dive into some questions. Then 40 minutes or so in, we'll dive into audience Q&A, so you can be putting questions into the chat as we go. And with that, let's get started with Kirsty.
Oh, thanks. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. Kirsty Gogan, co-founder of TerraPraxis, which is a non-profit making the case for nuclear energy to support our sort of broad decarbonization, prosperity goals, protect people and protect nature, empower uh, people. And also Lucid Catalyst, our consulting firm, and we advise the world's largest energy users.
And I'll
Fantastic,
go
and you're
next because
great.
I'm the co-founder with Kirsty of TerraPraxis and Lucid Catalyst. And I think the it's very insightful to say that they're both the intersection of energy and climate and the intersection of carbon capture and energy. That's a very we'll get to explore that today. Teach
And
me,
hey,
Chris.
folks. Yeah, I'm Eric Meyer. I'm the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic. It's a nonprofit based in the US that does nuclear advocacy, education, and outreach for about 10 years now. So we work on a lot of local campaigns trying to, well, initially a lot of trying to save existing reactors from shutting down, but that challenge has largely been overcome now. So I'm delighted to say we've shifted our focus to building new nuclear, and that includes the applications such as carbon dioxide removal. So super excited for the conversation today.
All right. Well, welcome to AirMiners. And folks, if you're new to AirMiners, if you're coming from the nuclear community or from kind of the climate world, welcome. If you're deep in carbon dioxide removal, then this is probably maybe not your first event. But to kick things off, I wanted to have Kirsty walk us through a bit of what's happening in the latest in there's this big wave of interest in AI and data centers and atomic energy. What's that been like for you? I read about it in the news, but what's it like for somebody who's actually working in this?
Yeah, thanks. We've sort of been we were at the beginning really with Microsoft when they first, published their policy paper, including nuclear energy, which was a really big step. And since then, obviously, we've seen, not just sort of signals from all of the other hyperscalers, but real investments and real commitments towards purchasing nuclear energy services and even investing in companies. And I think there's a few really interesting sort of features of that, of that trend that we've seen emerge over the last few years. The first thing to say is that when companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, first decided to sort of make their first statements about nuclear energy, their PR teams were hiding under their desks because they were expecting some kind of, big backlash, and it just never really came. And I think that's been like one of the really important sort of findings, which is that when big companies like this, household names, make their commitments around nuclear energy and statements around nuclear energy, it kind of normalizes nuclear into the broader conversation. And that has served to normalize discussions about nuclear energy in a way that has kind of begun to really evaporate some of the misconceptions and some of the mystery around nuclear, which I think has been very positive. Treat it like any other, clean energy solution, with its challenges and with its, benefits, and go forward from there. The second big trend I think, which is important to mention here, is obviously these companies have started making investments, and that's driven a lot of investor confidence. So not only sort of normalizing the conversation to increase public confidence around nuclear energy, but also investor confidence. which has helped, these companies propel faster towards their commercialization goals, which means bringing these technologies closer to, achieving their potential in these markets where we really need them to perform and start, helping us decarbonize in a competitive way. So that's been great. And then the other kind of big opportunity that's come out of this, which is a little unexpected because everyone thinks, oh, AI, energy hungry, is driving all this demand, it's driving up prices. But actually, we've been working with Microsoft in particular for the last 4 years to develop AI solutions to accelerate deployments of clean energy. So we started by looking at licensing applications for nuclear, which are, hundreds of millions of dollars and decades of work sometimes to they're very big, complicated efforts that have to be made before you know whether you have a project. So just an incredible barrier to entry. So if we can bring AI to bear on the development of these really complex license applications, we might be able to increase the deployments and the sort of de-risk those investments in nuclear. And we've now sort of expanded that to the broader permitting challenge. We all know that it takes longer to permit a wind turbine than it does to build one, right? So if permitting also represents a big barrier to any kind of clean energy deployment, including transmission or solar panels. If we can bring AI to accelerate deployments of clean energy, then it's a kind of a twist on the usual story about AI just being energy, bringing demand. It could actually help increase supply.
Fantastic. I love that. So AI helping accelerate nuclear itself, both from a kind of perception perspective and from a permitting angle. Eric Meyer, you're out there in the world doing advocacy for this. What's this AI nuclear experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a double-edged sword. Like I'm super excited about it in terms of having customers that are willing to pay extra to get new, firm, clean generation on the grid. That's really like awesome, enabling technology, enabling industry there that we weren't talking about even 4 years ago, right? It was all like electric vehicles and electrification of heating and cooling and some of these other applications, and we are a lot more climate focused. And I don't think a lot of people saw the crazy power demands of AI coming around the bend. So that's awesome because we do need these first of a kind plants are going to be more expensive, and we need customers that are willing to pay a premium for that electricity so that the rest of us, when we just need the electricity for other uses, and the utilities that are going to be building these things can buy like the nth of a kind plants that are less expensive than we can't afford to have a whole bunch of Vogel type experiences going around. So having those take care of those first of a kind costs are
Steve,
really nice.
Vogel experiences for the rest of the crowd. Say more
Yeah,
about what that
yeah.
is.
So those are the two reactors that were built in Georgia, and the first new nuclear power plants built in the U.S. in like over 30 years. And I should say, like there was learning that was seen there. Like even of the two units that were built there, the second came in about 25% cheaper than the first. And now that they're built, they're very reliably operating and will be for as much as 100 years potentially. But it was quite a feat to get those completed. And I'm heartened to see that the sister plant to that, VC Summer, just yesterday there was an announcement about Brookfield Renewable Partners and the nuclear company coming together to actually finish that build. That one was stopped mid process, so that's really awesome. But so that's the one side of the two-edged sword. As we have a customer here. The other side is data centers are kind of getting a bad rap, right? It's like they're kind of politically toxic in a lot of places because they're becoming known for water usage issues and potential environmental degradation there, not really providing that many jobs, just a few construction jobs, and then the prospect of them using all the electricity and actually causing rates to increase. So I think we need some very heavy regulation in all those things to make sure that they're a community benefit instead of a community burden. And those of us in the nuclear community are still figuring out like how to talk about that and navigate that conversation.
All right. So yeah, community benefit uh, policies to make that happen. That's something we have a AirMiners artificial intelligence group that's met a couple times, and that's one of the things we've talked about. Is look, this could be a tool to really expedite, designing your next system or doing. Somebody had a whole financial model they had put together using Claude, and at the same time, it's like, hey, this is a new use of energy, and where's that balance? So it sounds like yeah, it really comes down to policy and having this work for our communities. I wanted to ask Eric Ingersoll this next question. And this is, again, for bringing this community together. How does nuclear power and carbon dioxide removal, how do these things complement each other?
Well, uh, this is back to what you said at the opening, which is that, carbon dioxide removal typically requires a lot of energy, and it requires energy as electricity, and it requires energy as heat. And different systems for um, accomplishing carbon dioxide removal may have, different mechanical designs or require different ratios of those types of energy. But typically you know, there's like pretty clear benchmarks of what removing a ton of CO2 takes uh, from the air takes. And um, there's a whole class of technologies that need heat for regenerating the thing that is absorbing the CO2. And nuclear plants produce large amounts of heat. So, the power plants that Eric was talking about a moment ago are almost 1,100 megawatts. Um, and that's their electricity output, and their heat output before the steam goes into the turbine is 35 is over 3,000 megawatts of heat. And that's just a staggering amount. So, for example, if you were capturing CO2 with like an amine process and you needed heat to regenerate the amines to release the CO2 into your capture system and to get the amines ready to go through the absorption process again, you would need 3 gigajoules or so of energy to do each ton of processing. A small nuclear reactor, 300 megawatts, that's also making electricity, makes enough heat to capture 6 million tons of CO2. So the thing that one of the things that's kind of what that we all like about nuclear, but which is a little bit shocking for people who are new to nuclear, is just how much energy you're making in one of these modest-sized facilities. In fact, nuclear energy is the most power-dense energy production technology we have on the planet by kind of several orders of magnitude. And so the if you have systems, if you're thinking about systems that need a combination of electricity and low-grade heat for the capture process, nuclear is an incredibly good fit because you don't have to burn anything to make the heat, and you're already making electricity, which you can use for your fans and pumps and other things. And as a byproduct, you have you know almost 2 times the heat that of the electricity you're making. So you could actually think of SMRs or bigger plants as like almost perfectly designed for that kind of air capture process. The trick is you're just going to need a lot of the other stuff, the things that process the air and so forth. So we're really excited about this webinar and the applications for deploying nuclear like this. And we think that if you're going to scale air capture to the, sort of full-scale climate solution that many people think is required, it would, it's likely that nuclear would be one of the ways that you could accomplish that.
Great. So it sounds like if you're thinking about these million ton per year plants, then it sounds like nuclear can be
Yeah.
the way to do that.
Yes.
Any favorite examples you have of existing projects or processes that are working in this direction?
Well, there are quite a few papers being published on different aspects of integrating uh, into existing processes. Um, and um, I'm not aware of any plants that are in development. I know there was a feasibility study done on a nuclear plant that's being constructed in the UK. But uh, the thing is, right now, the the way a normal nuclear plant is designed, the two-thirds of the heat goes into the condenser coming out of the steam turbine, which is basically thrown away. In fact, it's sort of a little bit of a problem because you're like
Hmm.
rejecting all this heat into the environment. If you raise the temperature of that and use that heat in a productive way, say for this regeneration process of your absorber, you would basically not be throwing any of that heat away. You'd be able to use that massive amount of heat that is currently not being monetized. And so we think that if you want to achieve uh, these kind of processes at very large scale, like many gigawatts, you're going to have to find a way to make the energy for them very cheap. And using sort of large amounts of energy that's currently not priced and is being thrown away is that's a good place to start looking.
Excellent. Kirsty and Eric Meyer, I saw you both unmuted, so if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe the closest thing to this might be the X Energy Dow Chemical Partnership. So it's not carbon dioxide removal, right? It's pairing an advanced reactor with a chemical processing type of application there. So but you're using industrial process heat that's usually thrown away to do something productive with it. So it's kind of, just different chemistry, some different equipment, but a similar idea, and that's being built in Texas. So maybe that's a good thing to keep an eye on. And
Yeah.
down the road, when CDR becomes maybe more politically supported, would that be fair to say? Or there's like a decent price on it. Maybe actually I should update my understanding on that a little bit. Wasn't there like a big tax credit for carbon removal? So like 45Q or something like
That's
that.
right. Yep, and that's still going on.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
good.
Somebody needs that money.
Yeah, I mean, well, just to pick up on the incentives piece, that's, there are those incentives, uh, fortunately still in place. And there's other incentives too, like we were talking about data centers at the beginning, which also generate a huge amount of heat. Like if there could be ways of actually converting so-called waste heat from all kinds of industrial processes to atmospheric carbon removal. And if that were the case with data centers, they could become not just, if they were using clean energy, clean electricity from nuclear, for example, to power those data centers, and then using the heat for atmospheric carbon removal, those would become carbon negative data centers. So I think increasingly the hyperscalers are looking at ways of integrating multiple energy services into their operations to improve their overall sort of environmental performance, and also, create more of a social license to operate as well at the same time.
Yeah. And Tito, I would just add to that that, if if we're going to have a if we're going to accomplish our sort of a carbon break-even civilization, we're going to have to start building carbon negative processes into like pretty much everything we do. And that's going to take a lot of energy and it's going to take creativity, but certainly any place we're using a lot of energy, and using energy usually means converting it from one form to another. Um, we should really be focusing on how can we, build in a carbon negative uh, sort of process into that energy use. And um, so I think that the two examples that were just provided are good, but we have many, many examples of this kind of intensive energy use. And I'm I'm sort of assuming that we won't be giving up on industrial civilization in the next, few decades. Um, so uh, we're going to need to get quite creative about this, and we'll probably be using even more energy in the future. I would like to just say that data centers get a lot of blame for our increased energy use and increased energy prices, and they certainly, I think there have been data center developers who've sort of been free riding on the existing electricity system and stuff like that. But um, all the kind of energy using sectors of the economy have greatly increased their energy use in the past few years and have projected, fairly significant increases. So manufacturing, basic metals, like a lot of there was a we were in a kind of stagnant energy use period. And after COVID and uh, the economy sort of woke up and everybody started using energy more. And so there's a really kind of it's a double whammy, right? It's not just that data centers are using a lot of energy. They're just sort of like the most obvious sector that's using a lot of energy. But we're seeing this across the board with industrial and business energy use. And I think as a society, we used to believe that more energy meant more economic output, meant more, good stuff for everybody. And somehow we have let this rhetoric that, more energy use is bad get into our meme stack. And, you know, I think there's some sort of confusion about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you had every process in the economy was carbon negative. We would say, well, let's do every process in the economy more.
More.
It's kind
Yeah,
of like, well,
exactly.
we're going to have to
Yes.
get there.
Yes.
Um, and so, when you're talking about kind of the different waste heat and access to electricity, a lot of people have looked at direct air capture, these direct air capture systems. There was a DOE grant that went out to a university working on pairing direct air capture with nuclear power. It also has me wondering, in terms of making biochar or ocean alkalinity enhancement, doing mining, these sorts of things. I mean, when you talk about this, this big picture of everything in the economy runs on some form of energy. I'm curious if there's any other connections to the rest of the carbon dioxide removal world. Maybe, drying biomass, right? People always talk about, hey, we're building a pyrolysis machine. Part of it is we have to dry out the biomass before it goes in. Hey, we've got a lot of waste heat and energy
Yeah.
here that we can use. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would say that all of those types of the problem is the amount, right? Like, so a small little 300 megawatt nuclear plant would probably, you couldn't possibly bring all the biomass, that it could dry, to the plant for drying, right? So the trick, I think, is that you get this extraordinary amount of energy in a single place. And so what you want is you want to pair that with processes which are kind of scalable in that place. Collecting biomass is a very diffuse thing and has a lot of transportation, so it's probably not worth collecting biomass to bring it to a place to get free heat, and then take it back somewhere else. So, um, but things that interact with the ocean, for example, you could imagine that uh, you could do large scale because you can enable very large flows by interacting with the ocean. So if you're trying to change ocean alkalinity or um, other types of low temperature chemical processes that would accelerate the uptake of carbon, you could integrate those with nuclear. There's also people talking about integrating some of those processes with desalination plants, and desalination plants integrate very nicely with nuclear plants. So you could have a sort of a scalable solution that was doing both of those things together.
Yeah. I'll just quickly add, I've started sort of using this term, the Swiss Army knife, because, if you can make like large amounts of high capacity factor heat and power with a very small environmental footprint, essentially located where you want it at a whole range of scales from like 1 megawatt or smaller all the way through to like 20 gigawatts. Um, that is extremely versatile technology that's making heat and power for, just almost, it's hard to count the number of candidate use cases for those energy services. I mean, we heard already like chemical plants and steel plants and data centers and those kind of big industrial users, but what about synthetic protein production, right? Or, what about atmospheric carbon removal that then gets converted into synthetic protein? Or what about atmospheric carbon removal combined with hydrogen production to make synthetic fuels for the hard to abate sectors, which I think actually is starting to gather a lot more momentum now in the current, time check people. We're in this sort of new oil crisis, Strait of Hormuz, and I'm starting to find, that the topic of synthetic fuels production with nuclear energy kind of, coming back up to the surface here, which obviously isn't, carbon negative, because if you're taking the carbon out of the atmosphere and then putting it back in jet fuel, but at least it is carbon neutral, and that's still a big step.
And that, Kirsty, is a perfect example of one of these applications that's just a massive energy sink, right? You need to run the combustion backwards. It's very valuable if you can make fuels in places where people don't necessarily have reliable supplies of fuels, and you can make it carbon neutral, but it takes a massive amount of energy. And when you try to imagine like building the wind farm to power that, or building the solar project to power that facility, you just end up with like a really big wind farm and a very small facility. But when with nuclear, you can really kind of bulk up and create large scale production.
Well, it's
I
kind of
want
the
to say,
only thing that could compete with the density of fossil fuels, right? Because
yes,
fossil fuels are really useful. You can move them around and they're
those
incredibly fast,
LNG
you
carriers,
know.
we're discovering how useful that LNG is.
Yeah,
So, but I want to say one
until
other,
they're not.
yeah, until they're not. But I wanted to just say one other thing about this, which is we've also focused a lot, Eric and Kirsty have focused a lot on kind of how you decarbonize with nuclear. So, for example, using existing power plant sites for new nuclear means that you don't have to build transmission, and you don't have to maybe, build new cooling water systems. And so you get to reuse a lot of infrastructure in a kind of way that plugs right into our existing systems. And Kirsty and I recently have been doing a lot of work looking at how you could apply this not just to existing power plant sites, but to existing industrial users. So imagine an industrial user that has a 500 megawatt grid connection. If they built a 1 gigawatt generating facility, they could supply their own 500 megawatts and supply 500 megawatts back to the grid. So all of a sudden, you're getting like almost double use out of your grid. You're getting what was an import sort of location has become an export location. Your supply of clean energy has gone up, and you've created reliability for that customer. And when you think about how much the grid is really holding back our energy conversion to more reliable, clean energy system, being able to sort of make these chess moves where you can leverage the grid that we have, we think this is a massive, massive opportunity. And it would be really interesting to do a similar kind of analysis around carbon removal. Like, what are the kinds of places where it'd be really interesting to have large scale carbon removal sited? Um, is it next to desal plants? Is it next to cement manufacture? What is the thing? And by the way, decarbonizing cement manufacturing is actually a really interesting application for SMRs. So we can talk about that later if you want.
Yeah, I love this whole expansive, all these different things that you can do with, hey, we have all this energy we can use,
Yeah.
what direct air capture, ocean alkalinity, desalination. Eric Meyer, it's on you were on mute, so
Oh yeah, I was just reminded of a video I saw yesterday from one of these new companies that's working on carbon neutral fuels, Syntholine, and they noted that the um, the energy transfer of filling up a jet with A1 kerosene or jet fuel
Yeah.
is like 2.5 times in the amount of time it takes to fill up that jet. It's like 2.5 times faster energy transfer than a large nuclear power plant makes over the same amount of time. Just illustrating the pretty impressive energy density of liquid hydrocarbons, and that we're going to need, if we're going to do that process in reverse, where we're like pulling the carbon out of the air, out of the ocean, making hydrogen, making carbon neutral fuels. That's going to take a lot of energy to do that backwards.
Yeah, and I know that the it's sort of uncool to talk about climate nowadays, but uh, I there are other scenarios where nuclear energy would also be useful. In Kim Stanley Robinson's book, he talks about needing to pump seawater onto top of East Antarctica to deal with sea level rise. And of course, they go through all the different technologies, and it turns out nuclear is probably the best one for doing that. But we may have to be thinking about energy technologies in a way that is um, not based on our current experience of what the climate is, right? So the climate could be much more disruptive. We could have many more storms. If the AMOC stops, whole London and north Western Europe will be, like northern Canada, and their heat pumps aren't going to be working when it's cold. And so, we need to think. I'm not saying that's a definitive, scenario, but as we sort of think about, the kind of resilient energy system that we might need, it is useful to think about these kind of edge cases and can we design to a system that works for those as well? Um,
Yeah.
and
I mean, I think we've already seen a really big shift in Europe since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and with a new emphasis on resilience and energy security, and a pursuit of nuclear in response to that. And I sat on a meeting recently with the chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee in the UK government, who's responsible for sort of figuring out the big risks, the big existential risks that we face as a country. And almost all of them were climate related, whether that's through mass migration, food insecurity, water insecurity, other sort of, big climate impacts like the AMOC collapsing, for example. And, you
Thanks,
know,
Eric.
many of those um, many of those risks, can be mitigated through nuclear energy services, as we've been talking about. And that's before we get back to the topic of this webinar, which is the sort of scale of atmospheric carbon removal that we're likely to be undertaking throughout, especially the second half of this century, to try to really stabilize the climate.
Excellent. Thank you all for covering all those examples. I do want to shout out to our audience. We're switching to audience Q&A, so you can type in the chat or you can just raise your hand, and I'll bring you up. We did have, let's see, looks like Pedro had a question that got answered about to read about the nuclear power plant, the Vogel plant. Let's see what else is here. Eric put in a definition of AMOC for folks that haven't heard about that. That's
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Eric.
the Atlantic Meridian. I can see why people abbreviate it. Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. So it's that long circulation of that keeps the northern part of the hemisphere in the Atlantic warm. Um,
Yeah, I think if I remember, the last time it collapsed, something like 12,000 years ago, and that kicked off the mini ice age. And yeah, that'd be pretty rough for a lot of reasons. And yeah, and there's some recent research that came out that the models are operating at a higher resolution now, and like it looks like we're approaching the tipping point. So it's something we even, a lot of this stuff I worry about, like even in like the best case scenario where we really ramp up CDR and are able to maybe avert some ocean acidification impacts or something. It might, even in like the best case scenario, it might just be like, can we like staunch the blood flow a little bit? But that's it's obviously still worth doing because of all of the other breakthroughs that will happen in the process, and any little bit of progress towards mitigating these impacts is going to save easily thousands of lives, probably tens, hundreds of thousands of lives, and make the future better, even if we can't like have a complete win, and we're really just kind of fighting on the margins.
I see we have a question from Sigmar. Sigmar, if you want to unmute and ask this, come on up. Otherwise, I can read it out for you.
Sure. So, I was asking, we heard a lot about like various sort of theoretical possibilities and how nuclear can help decarbonize, also sort of help with other climate solutions. So that all sounds great. But in terms of like the practice, like what's the first project you would approach? Where do you think, what are the low-hanging fruits? Or, where are we most advanced? Where would we get the most bang for the buck, so to speak?
Should I take a shot?
Mm-hmm.
And go for it.
So yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks. You're grounding us, So the first thing to say is that, nuclear is already working really well. And, the plants that are built and operating today, operating extremely like, without a hitch broadly. And even when they do have one, it's like, it's the safest form of electricity generation. But these plants, they're like built to operate for a really long time. So like the big nuclear plants that like Vogel that just started operating right now, it's going to operate well beyond any of our lifetimes, probably for 100 years or more. And that's been the case in the history of nuclear technologies, which means that we haven't really had a culture of innovation in the sector. They kind of get them built, these cathedrals built, and then they just run. And the nuclear industry is a kind of a big operating culture, very successful, extremely incredible record of performance and economical. However, recently what we've seen are like this sort of a thousand flowers blooming of advanced reactor companies, startup companies raising private capital for the first time, commercializing all kinds of different technologies that are outside of the norm, light water reactor, for all kinds of different use cases like we've been discussing during this webinar. And what's really exciting about this new sort of era of innovation that we're in is that these technologies are getting very close to commercialization and deployment. And so the ones to really watch are obviously the SMRs that are currently being built, and there's SMRs being built in the United States and Canada and in countries all over the world. There's high temperature gas reactors already operating either in labs like the high temperature test reactor in Japan, which is now being commercialized by a whole range of different companies that are developing HTGRs because they're very well demonstrated and understood, including one commercial case in China, which has been operating now for 2 years. It's had some teething troubles. It's not getting to its full capacity factor yet, but when it does, it's designed for standardized deployment to essentially replace coal burning in all of their coal fleet, which is, that's one to watch. That's going to be quite extraordinary. The steam conditions that will be created by the new high temperature gas reactor will match the steam conditions at the coal plants. The other ones to watch, other than the sort of, TerraPower Natrium, which is, being built, progressing incredibly well through its licensing process, GE Hitachi building in Ontario, but boiling water reactor there. Obviously, X Energy we've heard about, again, just went public, really progressing with their licensing case and their deployment with Dow Chemical, a very strong industrial partner with excellent execution track record, really, important addition into the kind of nuclear sector. And there's many others. There's also the micro reactors, and we're very interested in those because these are not stick-built construction projects that need to kind of be adapted to their different site conditions. The manufactured reactors, and I'm thinking now of the companies like Westinghouse, Radiant, BWXT, Banner, Oklo, and Allo Atomics. These are designing much smaller reactors that are designed to be made and licensed in a factory and then delivered to site as a completed unit. And they're moving really fast because they're making products designed for a factory. And once they've demonstrated their products, which they're intending to do before the 2030 timeframe, 26, 27, 28 timeframe, then we'll be looking at a production line of deployments of these technologies. And, there's no reason why they necessarily need to stay that small. So they may scale from their current 1 to 5 to 10 to 20 megawatts to become a bit larger, but still made in the factory and then becoming even more useful for a broader set of use cases. So I hope that's helpful. I think we'll start to see, real operations on the ground before 2030. That's the headline.
I have some. Oh, Eric, do you want to go
No,
first?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I have some maybe more boring low-hanging fruit, but nonetheless, I think it's cool and exciting. So we have a number of restarts that are happening of reactors that were shut down early, mainly because of competition with really cheap natural gas. But there's 3 of those in the U.S. that are happening: Palisades in Michigan, the Duane Arnold Energy Center in Iowa, and formerly 3 Mile Island, which is now known as Crane Clean Energy Center. So those are coming back online, thanks largely in part to data centers, even though that's not the case for Palisades. Actually, that was some co-ops going in and buying some cheap power there. And then one of the silver linings of the very regrettable illegal war in Iran that I'm very much not a fan of. But one of the silver linings is because of the energy crisis that it has kicked off with the Strait and with the destruction of some of the Qatari liquefied natural gas facilities. We're seeing countries like Taiwan and South Korea start to work on restarting their plants. And as of like 2 days ago, um, Belgium also announced that their government is in the process of discussions to nationalize their nuclear plants essentially and take them over from NG, which is a big predominantly gas company, and take those over and restart some of the ones that were shut down in recent years. So restarts coming around the bend, and happening actively. And then there is a lot of potential for uprates. So getting additional capacity out of existing reactors. And there's some companies that have some innovative ideas on how to do that without shutting the reactor down for 2 years or more and losing out on that revenue from selling the electricity. So I see, I think there's projected something like 10 gigawatts of uprate capacity in the U.S. So that's some of those low hanging fruits, and that will help us, I think, rebuild an industry that has somewhat atrophied in terms of its ability to get projects done on time, on budget, and rebuild that so that we're there to deploy the advanced reactors even faster, and operate them well out the gate rather than having a big learning curve for that as well.
I see we also have a question from Pedro. Pedro, if you want to unmute and ask your question. And Eric, you wanted to build on the previous topic, so maybe that'll work here.
I'm happy to wait. Let's hear from Pedro.
Yeah, I'm just curious about SMRs and the size. I know someone mentioned 1 megawatt or higher. Maybe are there any lower size SMRs like power generators, similar to power generators, like inverter generators?
No. So this smallest, I mean, there are reactors that are smaller than 1 megawatt that have been designed for test facilities and test reactors. Even a 1 megawatt reactor is very, very small. And the short version of why is that there are things that scale. When you're building a 100 kilowatt solar project versus a 1 megawatt solar project, the real difference is that one of them has more area and more panels and more inverters, but nothing sort of qualitatively changes between the 100 kilowatt and the 1 megawatt. So you might have some fixed costs, but the fixed costs are a small part of the overall cost. And so your 1 megawatt project would have better overall economics by a small amount. Nuclear doesn't really work that way. So for the most part, nuclear energy has very large fixed costs, and it has a number of physical scaling factors which get radically better the bigger you go. So, and then nuclear fuel, we're used to, in large reactors, nuclear fuel is a very minimal cost of generation. So in a large utility reactor, it's about $10 a megawatt hour for fuel. But the way that fuel is used, it's basically how the reactor uses fuel efficiently if it uses its neutrons efficiently. And the smaller you get, the harder it is to use the neutrons efficiently. So small reactors may be cheap, but you start trading higher fuel costs for having a smaller reactor. So the jury's still not out as to how cost effective 1 megawatt reactors will be. There's definitely uses for, we have 1 megawatt diesel generators. We know there's tons of places where a 1 megawatt generator would be useful. So this isn't a comment about whether they're useful or not. But if we want sort of large scale, low cost, clean energy that's reliable from nuclear, we're going to need to very much focus on the factors that drive the economics of nuclear in a good direction. And I was going to answer the previous question with this, but one of the great examples of a place where that's happening, and it's a reproducible example, it's something that we could do in the United States or in other countries, is the way they're building nuclear in China. So China currently has about slightly little more than 60 gigawatts of nuclear and is planning to have almost double that by 2030. And in China, it costs about $2,500 a kilowatt to build a large reactor. And that means that the cost of energy from that is about 5 cents. So 5 cents for always on, super reliable energy. And if you integrated that reactor so that you could use the heat from the reactor in addition to the power, your cost of energy for carbon capture would be less than $10 a ton. Okay, so if we want to get to, so that's what we're talking about. When we talk about using large scale nuclear energy to make DAC cheap, we're talking about being able to, crank these plants out in a programmatic way. And Kirsty and I wrote a good report about how you make nuclear cheap through programmatic construction. But the potential, there really is a potential there for us to have very large scale, very affordable energy if we make the choice to sort of implement these learning programs, these construction programs in the proven way. I mean, this has been proven in multiple countries. So it's not it's not sort of like, is that a real thing or not? It's a real thing. But it requires policy focus and people to be educated. And if we do that, we can basically scale up the clean energy supply, especially if we can also keep deploying renewables. And and if we are trying to scale up processes that also need a lot of this kind of heat, we can end up with very, very low cost energy for air capture. And so
I wanted to jump in with one last question as we're closing out. Valerie asked a question in the chat. Maybe we can get to that. But the question I would have for the folks in the audience is, for folks that want to make this happen, folks are like, I love the vision. I want to help pull that forward as quickly as possible. What's something coming up in the next 6 months that people can join in or be a part of? And this might be an Eric Meyer question or the two of you.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a nice group of very dedicated volunteers that are going testifying in there. There's a lot of state legislation. There's like over 300 bills last year, and probably going to be more this year. And then there's regulatory proceedings, and we need people that understand this issue, how much energy we need, what's out there that's going to produce it reliably, and understand the full picture to show up at these meetings and testify and support and say, I'm from this state, I'm from this area, I support this, because there are still quite a few anti-nuclear types of folks out there who are spreading a lot of misinformation, disinformation, don't fully understand, or they're kind of
and they keep making the argument that we don't actually need all this energy. And
yeah,
we just explained that we're going to need thousands of gigawatts of energy
absolutely
if we're going to do DAC at the scale that we all, us DAC people all think we need. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah,
And what's a good way for people to join in that?
Yeah. So yeah, our website, generationatomic.org / get involved. You can see there's a link to join up there. Great way. We got a government team that meets regularly. Our Atomic Ambassadors program is actually like a not too dissimilar in a way to the AirMiners, where we offer a curriculum of training and a community around it. So yeah, that's definitely a great way to get involved, and then we can get you plugged in your local community, among other things.
I would
Excellent.
also encourage folks who are interested to kind of maybe start a nuclear DAC interest group with under the AirMiners auspices. I mean, I think this is a really interesting area. It's not like backyard DAC. This is like how we get to a place where we're doing DAC at the hundreds of millions of or billions of tons a year. But we have to do that. And I think starting to kind of propagate the ideas, having people like actually do studies, getting papers written, there may even be opportunities to like build some DAC demos onto existing nuclear plants. And I think that would be, you know, that would be very
Heck
exciting.
yeah. For folks that want to be a part of that or have ideas for that, what's a good way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, we our TerraPraxis emails are they can just email us.
Yeah,
Cool. Great.
LinkedIn, Instagram, email. We're all
All
over the
right. I
internet.
love the idea
We're
of this new
easy to
initiative,
find.
right? How do we
Yeah,
get, I mean, this is, just saying one plant can power up 6 million tons per year of carbon dioxide
One
removal. So
small
anybody that's
plant.
one small plant, so anybody that's thinking about, gosh, like, how are we going to power all this stuff? Now is the time it sounds like,
Yeah,
you
one
can
of
you can even
those
call up our
gigawatt.
friends at Microsoft and say, hey, I heard you've got a nuclear power project going here. We've got
Yeah,
something we can actually pair that up with it.
exactly. That's the kind of thing that could make real stuff happen. Yeah.
I love it. Thanks everybody for coming. Great to see you all. And we'll see you at the next one. And check out Generation Atomic. And let's create this world where we do have the power systems that we need to scale carbon dioxide removal.
Great. Thanks, Tito.
Thanks
thanks so
everybody.
much.
Thanks Kirsty. Thanks Eric Ingersoll. Thanks Eric Meyer. Thanks everybody for coming.